Well, good afternoon, everyone. I realize we're the only thing standing between you and the Vienna Boys Choir. But we'll try to be so dynamic and interesting today that you're on the edge of your seat and you do not want to leave this room. So I'm Christina Skierka. I'm founder and CEO of Power for All, which is a global campaign to end energy poverty by accelerating the adoption of decentralized renewable energy. So that's mini grids, rooftop solar, and increasingly what we're here to talk about today, which is the productive use of energy. So this is very much a growing product category for appliances and machinery that can operate in weak grid or non-grid environments. And our panelists today represent a very diverse set of experiences and points of view. And what I'm going to do is not embarrass myself by trying to read through everybody's bio. So what I will do, though, is I will introduce our sort of thought starters today. They're going to spend probably about 20 to 30 minutes up here. There's some slides and presentations. After that, we'll take a quick transition, and the rest of the panelists will come up. We'll mention everybody at that time. But until then, let me go ahead and get us started by inviting Mr. Carlos Sordo, who I've known for, what? Oh, and him. Aren't you? Okay, but I was getting to that. I guess order is important. So, all right. So first, let me introduce Ibrahim Mutebe he's the project manager from SNV, very well-known international NGO who's been working on development issues for a number of years. After his presentation, then we will hear from Carlos, who is currently a senior project manager with Gogla. I've actually known him for over a decade when he was first with Practical Action and was part of the original team getting Power for All off the ground. So with further ado, here is Ibrahim to get us started.
So thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege to be here in Vienna, to be part of the context-setting presentation for the convergences building sustainable agri-food systems using renewable energy. Once again, my name is Ibrahim Mutebi, and I work as a program manager at SNV, the Netherlands Development Organization. And as SNV, we are keen on seeing the nexus really grow. We are working across 3 sectors, that is water, agri-foods, and also energy. But in this presentation, we shall focus a lot on the energy and the agri-food sectors, which are really very profound. And one of the key areas as SNV that we have seen is that we need to work in collaboration. We need to break the silos across the different sectors. So one of the key highlights of our work has been one of the key events that we had, which was the Africa Energy and Agriculture Nexus, which really brought into a number of players, including IKEA Foundation, to really discuss with partners from agriculture how we can reinforce the energy issue across the agriculture value chains. But also there was a lot of discussion to understand what are the key issues that need to be tackled to break the silos. And one of them was seeing how do we transition away from impactful green energy projects, but also trying to ensure that we drive renewable energy, which is key for the future, as a lot of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the fossil fuels. But also there's need to drive our energy systems from a lot of the industrial revolution era, where there are a lot of fossil fuels being used, to more of a regenerative agriculture system, which is more friendly to the environment and ecosystem. And it's not clear really to so many stakeholders what regenerative agriculture is. So a number of stakeholders are coming together to define what this is. And as SNV, we have tried to identify 5 key practices that try to describe what regenerative agriculture is. One of them is regenerating soils to ensure that we enhance the health of the soils. But also we need to be keen on how we can enhance biodiversity and ecosystems, because it's important as we do agriculture to ensure that ecosystems thrive and we're not able to destroy them. We are also looking at how do we minimize on the inputs as well as resources that we are using for agriculture so that it's not intense in the terms of resources that it's using. and also trying to see how do you also reduce on the wastages and recycling of these products to ensure that there is cyclicality. We are also keen on promoting renewable energy as part of promoting regenerative agriculture, and we feel that this nexus helps us to really make it stronger. And we need to also think through what are the kind of energy systems that we need to see, because most of the energy systems we currently see are highly centralized. We have a lot of the grid happening, or even in Africa, but we need to look at where does agriculture actually happen. It happens in rural areas where a lot of people have no access to the grid. So how do we promote a lot of decentralized energy systems that can be able to promote energy access to the poor of the poorest? And that is why we need to promote these energy solutions. But also, if you look at the opportunity scan for renewable energy productively, there are a number of opportunities that really are there to enhance productivity, but also to ensure that we're able to see value addition and also minimize wastages across the different sectors. And we feel that we need to put also the farmer at the center of the conversation, because without understanding some of the issues or the challenges that the farmers are actually facing, then most of the solutions will not be impactful but also sustainable. And we also need to work together, because as SNV, this is just one organization. We are just one piece to the puzzle, and we need to see how do we enhance collaborations across the different stakeholders, both from the energy sector, but also from the agriculture sector. So this conference was really very pivotal, because it's the first time where you had an energy conference that had energy players being invited. It's usually the other way around, that you have energy people speaking to themselves and also agriculture people speaking to themselves. So we cannot really address the nexus issues unless we are able to speak together. So I'll also try to touch a lot on what is at stake, because if we don't address the nexus issue, there's really a lot at stake. And one of the key issues is trying to look at what contribution does agri-food systems contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. We have heard from different speakers since yesterday that a lot of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from agriculture, about 30%. And this is partly attributed to the lack of energy, or in some areas, energy that is being used is mainly driven by fossil fuels. So if we don't reinforce and also transition to more sustainable energy solutions, then we are going to have more energy emissions coming through from agriculture. But also we need to understand that the fight against climate change can never stop today. We need to understand that already impacts are happening, for example, in Africa, and a number of livelihoods in Africa are dependent on agriculture. So we need to understand how does this affect, for example, the ecosystems and also the food systems. If you look at Uganda, for example, a lot of farmers, over 70% of the farmers are depending on rain-fed agriculture, which is really impacting a lot on their livelihood, because the impacts of climate change are hitting hard. But we also need to recognize that most African countries have identified agriculture as one of the two top sectors that is vulnerable to climate change impacts. So if we don't promote some of the technologies like irrigation to be able to ensure that farmers are able to have all-round year access to water, then a lot of the agriculture will actually have issues. And also on the dairy sector, water is really essential. If you look at cow milk, 80% of it is mainly water. So without access to water, you find that a lot of productions will actually be at risk. The other key area touches a lot on the kind of losses and the wastages that are happening also in the sector. We are looking at around 24% of the losses happening from production up to the table, which is really very high. And we see that renewable energy has a role to play in reducing these wastages across these sectors globally. But also the situation becomes further worse in Africa, and I will speak a lot to Uganda, where if you look at the dairy value chain, you find that the losses are actually about 20% to 30% from harvesting to collection, which is really very big. And if you look at horticulture, where we talk about vegetables and fruits, you find that a number of farmers experiencing 40% loss of value, which is really pretty high. The other area would also look at what opportunities are we losing in terms of value addition. Again, this speaks again to Africa, because I'll speak more about Africa because that's where I come from. If you look at most of the industrialized nations, they are able to generate around $180 per ton in terms of value addition added to the crops that they are able to farm. But in Africa, it's a mere $40 per ton of value addition. And this is coming from the lack of access to energy, because only 10% of the foods that are produced in Africa are able to go through value addition, which really makes it very complicated. This means that farmers have lost opportunities for income, because that is around 4.5 times the amount of income they would have generated if they were able to have access to energy options. And we feel that it's now that we need to drive this change. Then lastly, we are looking at a lot of demand for land. As the population is growing, we are looking at around 10 billion people by 2050. But that means that we also need to produce more food. But we can be able to grow more food in an area that is less, and also use resources more sustainably, other than trying to expand a lot of land for agriculture. And again, in Uganda, for example, in the last 100 years, from 1921 to 2021, we have lost about 40% of the forest cover. And one of the key drivers is the conversion of land for agriculture, which is really very hitting to the different farmers. So we need to look at how do we mechanize agriculture, make it more efficient, and use less to produce more as part of this discussion. I will also try to provide a case example. This case example is nested on two of our projects that we're implementing as SNV Uganda in the dairy sector. One of them is sustainable energy for smallholder farmers, which is an energizing development program project. And it's also being funded by IVECF Foundation, who we are happy to have here as part of the discussion today. We are working with also GIZ and RVO, and also a local partner called Tache Holdings. But also on the agri-food side, we have another project which is called the Inclusive Dairy Enterprise Project, which is funded by the Netherlands government. And it's been running for 10 years, trying to seek opportunities in how they can add value to the agriculture sector, starting from production to consumption. And we thought that instead of working in silos as energy and also agriculture, we need to understand really where are the key issues that are affecting the farmers, because to the farmer, they don't see you as energy or agriculture. They want impact. And how do you support the impact generation? So we've been able to understand that to deliver this, we need to, first of all, be farmer-centric, understand really what are the key issues or challenges that the farmers are affecting. And this slide here tries to look at some of the key issues that we're able to identify as being critical for the farmers in promoting the solar milking machines. One of them was looking at agriculture and also the way how milking is being done in Africa being really tedious, because a lot of it is manual. And you find that it takes so much time. So you find that most of the farmers that we spoke to, we are looking at this as a very big challenge. Then also due to lack of energy for lighting and other productive use of energy in Africa, you find that there is no access to lights in most of the rural farmers. Most of the milking is done very early in the morning at 5 or 6 using small torches, batteries, but also some of them are using phone lights, which is really inefficient and also doesn't allow the farmer to really milk properly. There's a lot of wastage of milk in the process. But also there's high labor turnover. If you look at the number of farms that we visited, there's the need to ensure that there's lack of gradually, but also trying to make the milking process a bit more interesting and also something that can actually be done by several people. So you find that the labor turnover is really high in cases even where people have been trained, they don't stay on the job for long. And for the farmer, if they don't milk today, it will be a lost opportunity for income. There are also issues that relate to the type of hygiene and also the kind of injuries that come to the animals due to the physical milking done by hand. And this makes it very expensive for the farmer because they have to look at medication, but also do treatment to treat diseases like mastitis and also the issues to do with milk quality. So what we have done is to look at a number of factors. We have like 5 factors which are in the ecosystem. And one of them was to also appreciate that we need to bring in technology, which is really pivotal in undertaking this kind of work. We are able to look at it in twofold. One of them was trying to introduce the productive use of equipment that is coming from India because this technology is not available in Uganda. So we had to find ways of seeking out for partnership, and we were able to work with one of the companies called Shira that is based in India to try and look at some of the issues that we are trying to grapple with and provide us different machines that were helping the farmers to actually address their problems. We are also able to think beyond just the importing of the machines and look more into how do you build local capacity, because, for example, the solar equipment is readily available on the market. So we're able to work with the local companies and support them in the designing of the equipment that power the milking machines, and then they were able to provide the right equipment because it also reduces on the import costs, which would make the systems also more expensive. On the capacity building side, again here we had to work closely with our colleagues from the agri-food sector. One of the things that most people think about when they introduce milking machines is not understanding that you need to have a good supply of the milk from the animals. So we had a lot of capacity building happening from our agri-food colleagues, supporting the farmers to understand how do you feed the animals, how do you treat the animals, but also how do you handle issues of quality of the milk that is being milked by the animals. And that was really important to ensure that that capacity is provided. While on the energy side, we are providing capacity in terms of areas of operation and maintenance, and supporting also the farmers to understand how do you ensure that the machine is working right, how do you reach out in case there is an issue or a fault to the machine. So this was really very critical because it helps us to ensure that the technology is working, but also the farmer is able to benefit and realize a lot of potential from the machine. In terms of market linkages, some of the things that came to our mind was that when you promote milking machines, you're going to have increased productivity. And we've seen that some of the machines are able to increase that by 10%. But where do the farmers sell this milk? Because without access to markets, then that would actually be a lost opportunity. So we're working closely again with the agri-food sector colleagues to see how do we channel this excess milk to different aggregators who could actually bulk the milk, but also they're able to cool it and provide the farmer a premium price. Because most of the milk that is sold at farm gate is not chilled, but also it doesn't have really a premium price. So this was helping the farmers now to have better access to market, but also seeing the potential in terms of their income being increased. The other area on market was also trying to look at how do we think beyond just the milk increment. In Uganda, we have the Dairy Authority, which is trying to promote quality-based milk payment systems. And this brings in the issue of promoting milking machines to see how you can improve the quality of the milk. So they are also able to provide the farmers with an additional bonus depending on the quality of the milk that actually has been produced and also supplied, which made it very economically feasible for the farmers to actually pay back for the investments that have actually been assured. Then lastly, access to finance is critical because affordability is one of the key challenges that affects smallholder farmer, and we're able to link them to a number of microfinance institutions that were able to provide financing options. If you look at the landscape in Uganda, there were a few financial institutions that were providing funding for these milking machines, but trying to speak to the microfinance institutions and enabling them understand what the technology is, but also the business case and business model was really very essential. And that helped us to unlock some of the opportunities for these farmers to actually be able to access finance, but also see the value of working together with the microfinance institutions. So I'll end with this slide, which really shows a lot of opportunities within promoting productive use of energy in the dairy sector. The example of the milking machine is just one example of the production side, but there are various opportunities that exist from production to collection, processing, retail, and consumption. And I'll give opportunity to Carlos to come and present more about the productive use of energy in the dairy sector. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well. Thanks, Ibrahim, and thanks to everyone for coming today. My name is Carlos. I work for Gogla as the Senior Project Manager, focal point on productive uses of energy. And I'm gonna, well, also thanks to the organizers and the event for having this space, and also would like to thank also IKEA Foundation, obviously, for the opportunity to work on this exciting area. Also, the program Water and Energy for Food by IVECF, because that enabled us in the beginning to also be where we are at the moment. Gogla is an industrial association. We represent 200 private sector companies. We are a global organization. We have offices in West and East Africa, and also we have an office in the Netherlands, where we have the headquarters. And Gogla, for probably the majority of you in the room, you probably know that Gogla has been around for many years now. It's been 10 years now. And the main framework of the conversation has been around solar PV or solar household, like electrification. We recently, for the past years, we moved into the sort of commercial side of things, but agriculture was kind of a big question for the association. So 2 years ago, the story started 2 years ago when the Gogla decided finally to venture into the agricultural space, which is a very challenging one for us. But at the same time, we found out that we had a big justification to do so. 30% of our members are companies that are currently distributing, commercializing, or manufacturing productive use-based appliances, solar pumps, cooling devices, cold chambers. And so we strongly believe that they will come with us. They will be contributing to this conversation. And at the same time, we were feeling the pressure from those companies, along with many of the other stakeholders, for us to jump in, right? So 2 years ago, we started this incredible adventure. And we started to work with 4 different countries, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, and map out what does it take to actually get productive use markets to scale up. And so we delved into a complex conversation of different building blocks that we found are essential. I think Ibrahim has been touching upon them already. We saw policy as a key element. We saw finance as obviously another key element, and also working with and providing support to the companies that we work for, and also other companies. Obviously, there is a growing number of productive use-based companies in the territory, but they need support. They need more technical assistance. They need more, more value out of the industry so that they can grow. And finally, the adoption by the end users, by the communities, by the cooperatives, and all of that has to work at the same time. And if we don't make this working at the same time, we are not going to have these markets scaling, right? So we also did this initial distinction between nascent, emerging, and mature markets for productive use-based technologies, with nascency being the majority of the markets that we've been analyzing in Sub-Saharan Africa, while emerging markets are a handful, just a handful of them, offering the initial space for companies to thrive. And finally, mature markets, which are, I have to say, very, very little of them are actually at that level of maturity. So you can see that different activities and different initiatives have to take place depending on how mature a market is. So if we, at the policy level, we probably, well, I chose policy for this discussion today, but the others are as complex as policy is. So if we move into the policy one, which Google has been doing quite a lot for the past years, somehow we find out that moving from nascency into emerging markets, and from emerging markets to mature markets takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of discussions, convening, and it obviously requires to map out properly who is doing what, who holds the power, and how do we talk with those that have to be in the room, right, when that happens. So in the nascent markets, which is a majority of Sub-Saharan African countries, we need to raise awareness. Because if you talk to the ministries of water or agriculture, many of them don't know about these technologies. They've never heard about these technologies at the last mile area. Small solar pumps, or who are the companies behind this, right? Like, they don't know much about it. So is that convening, that engagement with ministry officers, chairmen of renewable energy agencies, etc., that takes a lot of time, but you need to build up this awareness. Capacity building obviously goes all the way through, right? Like accompanying them, Google does it with the Committee of Champions. We work with tens of Ministry of Energy representatives that we usually piggyback through the different conferences and gather them together so that we talk to them about this and other issues. But it takes time as well, and it takes resources. Multi-stakeholder engagement is definitely a key for this. And we've been doing that for the past 2 years in those countries. And it took, in the beginning, to find the champion. Who is the champion within the Ministry of Energy? Who is the champion within the Ministry of Agriculture? People who can make this agenda theirs so that they bring you along, right? Like, it's automatically happening. But in the nascent markets, you don't generally, naturally find them. You can, but you need that level of effort. The roadmap is another instrument that we've, along with the governments, we've been building with them. And the roadmap is an incredible tool because it ended up being uptaken by some of the ministries. I wouldn't say the success was 100%, but it was good and successful in some of the countries that we were doing this exercise. And the roadmap now is showcasing what are the activities that I was showcasing before that are already being taking place, who should be the natural actor behind, and if there isn't any actor, who should be the actor that has to take place, right? Like, is it the World Bank? Is it the Ministry of Energy? So finding out who is the responsible person, the responsible institution, and then pointing out to that, right? Like, that is your responsibility. You need to do that. And finally is the acknowledgement of productive use by the Ministry of Energy. And that's kind of the first level. And this is just the first level. Then we come into the next level, which is we need those champions at all the ministries. We need more capacity building. We need more convening spaces that includes interministerial committees, task forces, subcommittees, working groups, bringing the private sector to talk to the government, etc., etc., etc. It's a long etc. that makes finally mainstreaming productive use within the policies at the ministry level. So mainstreaming is making that piece of technology and business models part of their discussion, daily discussion. Finally, we can jump into and we've seen like Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya are already getting there. They need a lot of support, right? But they're getting there, they're understanding, they're bringing their colleagues and peers from different ministries on the table. Finally, mature markets, I have to say there are very little of them. India is a good example of not yet fully mature, but it's doing a good business with the biggest subsidy program, 3.2 million solar pumps already being distributed across the country. It's a good example of, but it's obviously, context is very different from the Sub-Saharan Africa. And there you have budget allocation, given directly to the the subsidy programs or tendering programs or whatever, but it's coming from the ministry itself, manufacturing laws, as India has done, and obviously you keep doing the convening, right? The convening exercise. So that's just an example of what we need to do while we do the other stuff, the other good stuff that Ibrahim was talking about. And because I wanted to be brief, and I just tried to condense some other points that I do think are important in working with productive users at a broader level. Like we've been at Gogla, we have an internal financial tool that allows us to measure and understand the level of deals that are happening, the RBF programs that are being funded, also the level of debt and equity that is being provided, not just for the lighting services, but also for the productive use-based appliances. So we have a bit of an overlook or a kind of a overarching reading of what's going on in the financial sector, and we've seen that grants from foundations and philanthropies, etc., are shifting rapidly into productive users of energy, which is a great news. So because the sector is growing, philanthropies like IKEA Foundation are coming in, right? Or they've been coming in like for several years now, and the amount is growing. And we have to congratulate ourselves for that. But that's not enough. That's just the beginning of the iceberg. We've also seen RBF programs are taking place more and more. The World Bank coming in Uganda, for instance, is just an example of this $100 million program that was approved and launched 3-4 weeks ago. But there will be more. And so we are also very happy to see that RBF, like supply side subsidies or demand side subsidies as well, are coming in. So that's going to help for sure companies to grow. As an example, in 2019 we just had 5-6 companies that got funded. Now we have over 30 companies being funded in 2022. So that's once again another indicator that the sector is growing. And we get many more companies being funded in 2023. And there are cycles of grants and R&D and RBFs coming in, so which is great news, but it's not enough. We need more. Consumer finance is the other part of the conversation, because companies, obviously, if you have consumer finance for the last mile, for the smallholder farmers, they're obviously going to go for and purchase the products, but that's not happening unless the companies have pay-go services, right? That's for the extent of South Sahel Africa. That's obviously not the case of South Asia, where MFIs and the financial institutions there work in a different way, and they provide this finance as well. But that's a gap in the space, and we see very few companies, particularly the ones at the solar water irrigation pumping industry, coming into pay-go. And definitely an important key milestone for increasing the sales. But we see as well a challenge for those companies to provide the finance alongside the technologies. That is also, in a sense, is bringing us back to 10 years ago with the vertical integrated companies that tend to do everything, right? Like providing the finance, providing the technical assistance, the technology, right? And those companies are still very, very small, right? We're not talking about great numbers in terms of staff. I mean, these companies are small generally. So there's a question mark around how to best provide the consumer finance that I hope the panel will reply to that. Then there are other elements that I think Ibrahim has been touching already. The capacity upskilling is important because many of these companies do not necessarily know about the agriculture. They can sell stuff, but they don't necessarily accompany the technologies with agricultural-based knowledge or understanding of the water wells or how to irrigate the field, right? Business model testing and development is still ongoing in many ways for many of the technologies that are not considered near to market, like solar milling or solar electrical-based dryers, or some of these technologies are still in a different level of maturity, and partnership building is definitely a very big one, because we see a lot of missing opportunities here. Like, companies want to do everything themselves, and I understand they want to in order to scale up their businesses, but at the same time, there are great partners, potential partners out there offering networks, distribution networks at the agricultural level. Like in Uganda, for instance, you have a couple of companies that have access to thousands of farmers. But they don't do solar irrigation. So you can easily match with those companies to open up a new customer base. You just need to educate this second company to sell your pumps directly in the last mile, right? But it takes time, once again, it takes pay as you go, it takes finance. Market linkages, I think Ibrahim also was touching on that point, is that many of the companies that we see are entering or already have entered the space, they offer services way beyond the technology. They link up the customers with markets in an aggregating way, so they sell the produce of the farmers directly in the markets, so that the farmers don't have to go to the markets, right? For instance, and that brings added value to the farmers. But those business models needs to be well piloted. The financial models have to be reviewed, so still a lot of work to do, but that's very promising for now. Market data, that's another field of work that we are very much looking at, because these new business models, like fee-for-service business models, where I bring my crane of tomatoes, right, and I leave it for 7 days, and I pay 10 cents of dollars per day, so that you keep my tomatoes and you sell the tomatoes in the market, the numbers of sales is just one cold chamber. In terms of data numbers, it's just one cold chamber, but you're probably benefiting like 500 farmers in the same place. So we need to talk about impact rather than just sales. And at Gogla, we are very conscious about that. We need to change the way we also have metrics about productive uses, how we report back to the industry, et cetera, et cetera. That's an ongoing work, so I bear with us while we do that. Also, we obviously need the contribution and collaboration of all the stakeholders in the industry. Finally, new business models that, as I said before, are emerging. We still have the big challenge of awareness, the three A's, awareness, availability, and affordability, right? So there are different elements that play together here. There's the RBF subsidy conversation. There is the policies that enable the sales and scaling up. There is the demand creation on the ground, etc. And those are the big barriers that we have at the moment that we have to beat up in order to scale the markets. Those are just some thoughts or some food for thoughts for the conversation later. But I will leave it there so that we can start the panel. Thank you so much.
Okay, if I can ask all the panelists to please come up. Thank you so much, and thanks for those great presentations, Carlos and Ibrahim. And while everybody's getting situated, let me just understand who's in the room. Who is part of a company? Who's some sort of corporate entity? You sell products, I know you. Okay, so few number of people, so about 5. Who is like a diplomat or policy person? You're like, am I going to put my hand up? So who else is in the room? Do we have NGOs? Okay, so lots of NGOs. Great, okay, excellent. Anybody else, like, that you didn't raise your hand? What do you do? Okay, student, totally legit. Administer? Investor, okay, I was like, administer, okay. Great, well, that's useful to know, right? Oh, Hanak, of course. How would you we're a business. Yes.
We do similar things to some of the NGOs.
Okay, yeah, and you're also investing, right? Yeah. So, okay. So, what's really useful about seeing that demographic is it does help us to kind of think about where we want to take the conversation, but beyond that, it also represents the exact ecosystem that's needed, right? We don't have any, I know that there are some farmers in the room. There's businesses that are farmers and farmers that run businesses. But this is what we actually need. So I think Carlos was mentioning in his remarks about the need for ecosystem transformation. And the truth is that there's no single policy or program or product that is going to get us to a sustainable agricultural system, that we actually need all of us working together. So my hope for this session is that we walk away from this discussion today feeling some sense of what each of us can do in our respective areas of work to make a contribution here. I just realized I'm sitting very far away from everybody. I don't know how this happened. So I'm gonna ask that we do a quick few opening comments from people we haven't heard from yet, and then we'll get into discussions. And I would hope this is more interactive. Like I realize it's warm in here. You know, you could be listening to the choir, but you're here for another kind of singing. And I'm really hoping it's a little bit more interactive. So can I just ask, do we have microphones around for people to ask questions? How is that set up? Okay, there is one, and that's going to be operated by the gentleman in the suit. But just to get started, let me turn to Ute. Do you mind just talking a little bit about Irina's interest in this issue and sort of, you know, essentially why you're on this panel today? Not like a big, long statement, but just a little introductory remark. And then I'm also going to ask the same for Yolanda and the person who's remote. Sorry.
Well, someone invited me. I guess that's why I'm here. And I love to be on a panel with you.
Absolutely.
So IRENA, obviously International Renewable Energy Agency, I mean, you know, we have 167 member states. A lot of the work we do is, of course, on, you know, deploying renewables in the power sector, the big stuff. But of course, the end-use sectors, we all know, are incredibly important. We've had other sessions where we've heard about 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the agriculture sector, etc. But, I mean, a lot of that is, of course, not in developing countries. But, you know, we want to make sure that there is awareness about the potential for renewables in agriculture in the developing world, the interlinkages with energy access, which we're very concerned about. You know, we always stress it's got to be an energy transition that's just and inclusive. Well, obviously there's not much transitioning in many countries, like in Africa. As Tamilola said yesterday, we actually need to get energy to people, and so we think this productive use area is a very important one for renewables to assist.
Okay, that's great. And to be fair, there is some existing energy out there, right? But a lot of times it's fossil fuel based. So there is a discussion that needs to be had around transitioning off of that into renewable form of energy because, again, the climate doesn't know boundaries or lines on a map. And so how we practice agriculture in one part of the world affects how we practice agriculture in every part of the world.
Although, to be honest, I mean, considering how much energy we use, say, here in Europe, and fossil fuel energy, the few diesel generators in Africa probably don't make a huge difference in terms of emissions. But of course, it inhibits people being able to afford it often
Yeah, and realize full productivity, yeah. So, and then I'd love to turn to Yolanda, and if you don't mind talking just a tiny bit about yourself and the IKEA Foundation. And one of the things I just want to applaud, and several of us up here are funded by the IKEA Foundation, and several of us are working in productive use, and several of us are trying to build the ecosystem. So I think it's also a testament to the foundation, but also to the entities that you fund, that we're arm in arm in this instead of trying to compete against each other. So this is a great representation of that. But do you want to tell us a little bit about IKEA's work in ag and energy?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that's good to hear. So I'm probably not needed on this panel then anymore. But I'm Yolanda. I'm working as a program manager in the renewable energy team at IKEA Foundation. And energy is one of the thematic areas that we focus on as a foundation, and in particular, productive use of energy. And Christina, actually, one of your comments from yesterday actually made me think, like, should we rebrand that? Because I heard you make a statement on one of the other panels for that. So I'm still welcoming any suggestions for that. But also, if we look at the geographic focus where we work on, from that portfolio point of view, it's Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, India as well. And if you then look at energy for productive use, it does make sense to look at smallholder farmers as well, because it's such a big proportion of the population. So agriculture is one of the other thematic areas that we work on, regenerative agriculture in particular. I mean, Ibrahim already touched upon it a little bit. So for us to really work on those synergies, step outside of our silos, and I'm really also embracing all of the partners here to, take the hats off of your organization work together on that ecosystem.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then if we could turn to our one participant who's remote, Eveline Jansen, who is the regional program manager for InVio. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Forgive me. Hi, thanks for joining us. Could you tell us just a little bit about you and your organization and any initial insights to get our conversation started?
Hi, yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Christina, and hi, everyone. Happy to be joining still virtually. So I'm Evelyn. I'm a program manager at NVU, and I think NVU, it requires some introduction. So based in East Africa and leading our work here, NVU is, in its essence, it's a startup studio. So we build social impact startups, but from scratch, starting from a problem or an unsustainable system that we identify, and then using that as leverage to design a business model around that can change the system. And then we validate and test that model and start building the company, making them investment ready. We've been doing that since, let's say, 2004, so almost 20 years. We have a presence across the globe, but specifically here in East Africa, in Kenya, we focus on the agri-food systems. And so we've been building ventures and businesses in that space, focusing on preventing post-harvest losses and the transition to regenerative agriculture. So, that's where we kind of fit into this. We have a number of ventures. So the ventures we build are designed to be highly scalable and highly impactful. And for example, one of the ventures that we have built is an off-grid solar-powered cold storage provider at Farmgate, which is Soko Fresh. And we have another renewable energy powered value addition venture in the pipeline. So we kind of come from the company perspective, an overarching company perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. And I'm going to do my best to remember you are there and make sure we get a number of question opportunities back over to you. So I do have a list of questions, and we do have a particular place we want to take this conversation. But by all means, as we evolve, please just raise your hand if there's a question you have or a comment you want to offer. Obviously, there's expertise up here, but there's a lot of expertise in the room as well. So please consider this more of a facilitated conversation between us all. So because the focus of this panel is building a sustainable food system with productive use, I think it is probably a great place to step off there and get into some conversation. I actually just saw a movie before I left, a documentary called Common Ground, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but it was a second build on a piece that came out a couple years ago called Kiss the Ground, and it was basically trying to popularize via Netflix and documentaries the idea of regenerative agriculture. Now, one of the things that always particularly raises my eyebrows is that nowhere in the discussion of regenerative agriculture is there a discussion or a requirement that that definition includes non-fossil fuel resources, which aren't regenerative. So one of the topics, Carlos, I'm going to turn to you first that you raised, was really about financing and providing the financing that's needed, because it's actually, we're talking today a lot about developing countries, but it's also absolutely an issue in the global north. And I do want a clarification on one of your bullets, and then I want to ask a follow-up question. So one of your bullets said that 75% grant funding received in 2021. And and I wanted to talk about that because that's largely, I believe, upstream or for corporates, right? And so ultimately, I guess the way that is used for affordability for consumers is it reduces initial prices. I'd be interested in hearing from you, from two things based on your research and experience. You had mentioned how important customer financing was. So are you coming from the perspective that needs to be through other entities like MFIs, or do we know something that maybe coupons or rebates where the customer has to take action, so therefore has skin in the game, somehow is better for market development?
Thanks, Christina. Well, that's a good question. I would avoid. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I would avoid just going to the numbers in specifically, but what we know is there's a big shift in the grant facilities in the recent years, in the last 2-3 years, from moving from the so-called more traditional solar home system industry into the agricultural and energy space. So the sort of the so-called productive uses of energy. So there's been a shift, and now we find a number of philanthropic donors and bilateral agencies in Europe and so on and so forth, moving into the and testing and like pushing innovation in from the hands of the private sector throughout different schemes, grants, subsidies, etc. So there's been a big shift from where we were before and where we are now, and that's what the data is telling us. From a consumer perspective or financial perspective, we've also seen that out of the 30% of members that we have that commercialize, distribute, or manufacture productive use-based appliances, for which a big majority are solar water pumps, solar water irrigation pump-based companies, but most of them do two different kinds of business models at the same time. So it is not an exception. You can find a company that does commercialize, for instance, solar home systems and cooling or freezers or refrigerators, for instance. The companies do, sometimes they do both, sometimes they do even more than two at the same time. But what we've seen is that, once again, the very big companies that are still members of COCLA, but have traditionally been commercializing and scaling up in the space of solar home systems for domestic and commercial spaces, are not the ones that are jumping into the so-called productive uses of energy. So who is jumping into the productive uses of energy is, above all, small companies, African-led or based in Africa or in India, that have a lower level of muscle, of financial muscle. They are therefore having bigger risks in terms of their adventures in this space. And they don't have necessarily that level of experience in raising the capital that they need. So they really suffer in raising capital. And at the same time, we obviously are looking at appliances that are much more expensive. So usually 5, 6, 7 times more expensive than solar home systems. Therefore, riskier. Therefore, you cannot afford a default rate similar to what solar home system companies have. So you cannot have a 30% default rate in solar water pumps, because then the company is going to be broken, right? So there's a tension in the finance conversation, I think, is happening now, with companies willing and asking for more grant support, more finance support. And consumer finance plays a very important key aspect, specifically for those companies that are still using the traditional last mile agent distribution network, where you just sell individual systems to people, rather than the new businesses or business models of fee-for-service kind of approaches. And so selling a solar water pump without having consumer finance is barely almost impossible, right? Because the farmers they need the installments, they need to pay back, right? Like they don't have the funding they don't have the money in their pockets, so you need that level of pay-go, that level of financial tools, which is different from what we've seen in India. In the case of India, the context is different. The Sub-Saharan African context is more prone to pay-as-you-go models, because the commercial banks and the MFIs are not playing the role for now. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And could I ask, Eveline, if you don't mind chiming in, where are you dialed in from today, by the way? Where are you?
I'm in Nairobi.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. I'm just wondering, based on the work you do and some of the innovations you've seen, does that ring true? What's the best way to develop incentives to actually encourage farmers to adopt the processes? Is it solely some of the mechanisms that Carlos identified, or would you add something to the mix?
Yeah, I was reflecting also a little bit when when Carlos was speaking. I think from our experience, so first of all, we kind of have been looking at slightly bigger systems. So these are not necessarily systems that a farmer would purchase, like a cold storage. There's not going to be a farmer, not quickly, that is going to purchase a cold storage. First of all, there's not enough money, but also it's probably going to be empty half of the time. So it just doesn't make too much sense. So then you need to start thinking, I think, in a different approach. You need to be a bit more creative, where you're thinking, can you work with a farmer cooperative? Can you work with a group? Or in our case, what we did in terms of like business model innovation, what will really unlock the use of such a storage without the farmers needing to take that ownership, but still profiting from it? And I think during the work that we did, we also, we started with that idea. So, okay, let's have a business that unlocks storage at farm gate for farmers, because then they can just do like a pay-as-you-store model, for example. But also here, and this is going to speak to what Ibrahim has been saying, what Carlos has been saying, there is no farmer that is just going to come with their harvest to the storage and put it in there and pay for it without there being any guarantee of a market. And so you kind of have to start then thinking, like, what is the actual problem that you're solving, and how are you going to shape your business model around it? And so we've taken a kind of like slightly different approach, where essentially we're saying, okay, we are off-taking from farmers. The technology is essentially enabling us to do that in the most efficient, in the most professional way, making sure that when we link directly to farmers, to markets, we can pay the farmers more because we have higher quality, we can sell more of their harvest, et cetera, et cetera. So there is kind of like, it's more like a utilization model rather than a consumer financing model. And I would even say, like, really think through what kind of business model that you're putting out there. Like, are you a technology provider, or maybe like even in the case of, and this is probably not very realistic, but just kind of like turning the business model around. If you are having a solar water pump, you can also actually be, let's say, a tomato off-taker that provides solar water pumps to their contract farmers to stimulate irrigation, and use kind of like part of that sale from those tomatoes that you're making, because they will be producing more tomatoes. Maybe there, in over a few seasons, they can pay back for the solar water pump. But in that case, you're a tomato off-taker, and you're not necessarily a solar water pump provider. So kind of like thinking, being a bit more creative when we're talking about like businesses putting products in the market.
Thanks for that. Well, and on this topic of how best to engage farmers, I think I want to turn back to Ibrahim for a moment. The gentleman who runs the Powering Agriculture campaign for Power for All, he's based in Uganda, and he's a farmer himself. So we're actually quite close to this community as well, and hopefully you and Brian talk at least once in a while. Okay. But I'm wondering, so Ibrahim, there was a very well-known study that IKEA funded, and I believe it was either funding through NDEV or through SNV, that did a multi-country survey of farmers and their orientation towards, again, the poorly named productive use category. And I'm just wondering, maybe if to help sort of bring the crowd along with us, what did you really take away as some of the key findings from that work, and how did you apply it? I remember specifically that there were very, very low awareness numbers across the agricultural community about anything beyond solar water pumps. But there is a whole category of 10 to 15 different kinds of products that would support ag and greater productivity. So maybe just bring those two things together if you could for us. So, the findings real briefly from that report, but then also how do you put it to practice? How do you actually get farmers on the ground engaged and enthusiastic about transforming how they create productivity on their farms?
Thank you very much. One of the key areas that we have identified as being critical to supporting productive use of energy is trying to understand really from the end user point of view. Because most of the end users have a number of challenges that they're affecting. And when you look at the design of the programs, they can maybe focusing on only one technology. For example, maybe if it's irrigation, And sometimes you find that it's beyond just the irrigation because that's more at the production level. And maybe perhaps the end user needs further, maybe cold storage. They also need access to maybe value addition technologies which are not being provided for as part of maybe a program. So we have seen the need to shift away from just also promoting technology, but more or less understanding the ecosystem in which the end user is working, and then trying to then design the right solutions. And also it touches more to do with a lot on the financing, because when you talk about business models, most people think about business models from the perspective of the entrepreneur, because it's more about return on investments and return periods, things that the farmers may not really understand. But you need to also recognize that if they're able to afford, there's a lot of thinking that we need to get money out from other funders to support the energy development. But this is really not what we need to also focus on. We need to understand that internally or locally, this funding is there. We need to just show the farmers where is the value add. For example, if you do irrigation as an example, how much increase in income are you able to generate? But also, in addition to that, are you able to have access to market for that produce? Because just producing many tons of maybe maize or horticulture produce is not enough. We need to see the money coming back to the farmers, and then they're able to make the decision to acquire these products. The other point which I would also try to point to is that when we move away from centralized energy systems, which are mainly grid-based, because that has been the norm for a number of African countries to invest a lot in hydropower development, and also try to use a lot of fossil fuel generated systems to reach the different communities, it's not going to solve the energy problem in Africa. And then it also means that if you look at energy access for productive source of energy, the opportunities will be limited. We need to look at how do we make it more cost effective, because with the grid, it's highly expensive because people are not able to afford the tariffs. First of all, the losses are high, and this is all money that is being paid for by the end user. So we need to unlock the funding and then understand how do we promote decentralized energy systems within the communities. That also creates the sense of ownership for the communities to understand how do I do a simple repair and maintenance, for example, for a solar system that is supporting productive applications. It also adds a lot of value to employment within the communities, because if you also think about the equipment and you talk about only exporting or importing these products, we need to build local markets, because then also it makes it easier to have timely after-sale services. If I'm in Uganda and I need to consult an engineer in India, it may take me days before I have a solution, and farmers are looking at how they can use the machines on a day-to-day basis. So if you're not addressing that issue of timely after-sale services, but also ensuring that there is continuity of service, then it's going to be a challenge for adoption to actually reach the scale that we want to see. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And just so I am looking out regularly into the group here, looking for hands up or microphones being passed, and I'm not seeing anything happening. Yeah, no, I know. I'm trying to get the, sorry. So let me just ask a question, and then we'll hear from you in 1 second. So one of the things I just heard from Ibrahim was about localization. And I think that's such a great point, because when you think about the entire supply chain of this complex international system, we are spending a lot of our GHG budget flying things, shipping things around, when we could actually focus on localizing and improving productivity and increasing agricultural independence for many other countries. But we do have the International Renewable Energy Agency on our panel today, and I do want to make the point that we're really talking a lot about the Global South, but this is, again, a global supply chain. So Irina, Ute, given where you sit, I guess I'm curious, what are some of the thinkings, what's some of your findings about the kind of policy that might work well in both the global north and the global south to, really try to create either more localization or better use of renewable energy? I'm just curious if you could maybe take us up a notch, because we've been really focused on global south, but this is a global market for food. So what can we do in the global north as well?
Well, it's kind of difficult to, global north, global south. I mean, it's a very different thing talking about geothermal use in greenhouses in the Netherlands to the productive use issues we're discussing at the moment in, say, in Africa, where we're actually trying to bring energy and add value and everything, which is not what you would be doing in the Netherlands, where you'd really be replacing, you're using renewables to replace fossil fuels. I mean, there are some common policy instruments, of course, for governments to use, and we've already heard, I think you mentioned it, about the Indian solar pumping program, about subsidies. I mean, of course, that's what we've done here in Europe as well, to get renewables into the system in the end-use sectors. We're still having to do it, actually, now, in heating and cooling, for example. But I think there's sort of some other important things, and I mean, it's not sort of about localizing the supply chain, but I think one of the important things is that we don't end up dumping renewable technologies, which are not the best because we don't have certification systems. And that's something we've had to do here in the global north, but it's really important in the global south as well. So that it's one of the important roles governments have to play, and that can be done also, I think, on a regional basis. Often, you're sort of asking about international organizations as well, aren't you? I mean, what are the roles of regional and international organizations in a sector where effectively it has to be local solutions, doesn't it? But I think we can play a role in terms of bringing out some of those best case examples and the lessons learned and bringing people together.
Yeah, did you want to identify yourself, the organization you're with, and then ask away?
Okay, thank you, Christina. I'm Rhea from Energizing Development, and I was here yesterday with Yolanda talking about solar irrigation. And I have a question about market linkages. I'd like to know maybe from Ibrahim or Evelyn what their ideas are about pure business models that improve market linkages. Because yesterday we said again, okay, farmers don't just need solar irrigation, they need better inputs, they need training, but they also need off-takers. They need to know when their production is increased that there's going to be off-taking. Right now it seems like the best models we see is sort of like contract farming. You identify your farmers, you give them the inputs, then you buy their products and you export it. So that's good, but it's not really increasing resilience in the local food markets because those are the cash crops. So it's a cash crop focused kind of model.
Okay, so your question, just to restate it, was?
Okay, sorry. What other business models do you see where you can integrate, I guess, pure technology into business models that support farmers to get their increased produce to market, but not necessarily maybe just export markets?
Okay, great. So we're going to go to Evelyn first, and then we'll go to Ibrahim. But I just want to clarify one thing for everybody, whether you're online or in the room. So what was just mentioned was the use of the term pure. So that was a term invented by the IKEA Foundation, which stands for the productive use of renewable energy, which is the same but different from PUE, which is the productive use of renewable energy. That's the more sort of common term. I have an issue with all of this branding because I think it makes it impossible for people not in this market to understand what the F we're talking about. But that's for another panel at another time. So Evelyn, if I go ahead and turn to you first to answer that question, and then we'll go to Ibrahim.
Yeah, thank you. I would say, I hear the question and I understand where it comes from, but I would in the end say that market linkage is market linkage. Like farmers also need local markets. I can see, and it's a little bit like also touching on perhaps incentivizing regenerative agriculture with productive use or appliances. Like I can see where, if you're incentivizing a farmer to farm regeneratively, it means you're gonna, tell them to plant much more crops than just a cash crop. So you want them to be intercropping. They might have like 20 types of crops on their farm. And then of course, like getting to a certain amount, or like getting to the economies of scale where you can easily trade with a market, be it the local food market, or be it semi-local food market, or be it like the bigger markets in the cities, you do still need to aggregate. So also there you can have a storage functionality where you can have all the different kinds of products coming together. You can also have value addition in that sense that can really, like, for example, if you want to, something very important in regenerative agriculture is that you have a lot of pulses and a lot of like nitrogen fixing plants. So if you want to incentivize farmers to do something with that, they also need to have a market for that, or to have some kind of like offtake for that. And this could be a value addition venture where you're processing it into an alternative meat, or you dry mangoes that come from the and you package them. So there's a lot of different ways where it doesn't just benefit the export markets, but also the local market, local food security, and local resilience, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Ibrahim?
Yeah, thanks very much, Raya. I would just add maybe briefly to what Evelyn has just mentioned. What we also need to look into is supporting maybe, again, the local market, because I'll give an example in Uganda, since it's a solution-oriented discussion. One of the key areas we have recognized during our work on dairy is the need to increase on the local consumption of milk, because currently Uganda is not doing very well in terms of the liters that are consumed per year. But we've recognized that maybe schools and pupils really need value addition to their meals in terms of putting milk as part of one of the menus. So we have what we call a school milk program, which has been introduced to create awareness to the parents, but also to create awareness to the community members on the value that drinking milk can add to the nutrition, but also supporting the ecosystem in which the farmers are working. So that has really been very instrumental, because a lot of schools have been able to enroll it, and we've been able to do maybe pilots of 5 schools that maybe later went to 10 schools, and also trying to bring in the government, because some of the issues to do with feeding in school require a lot of policy change and shift. And this meant that also the government comes in to subsidize and maybe speak to the parents and see how they can co-finance this kind of initiative. But we realized that to the farmers that are in the communities where these schools are linked to, for example, farmers who are producing the milk, it adds a lot of value, because some of the students who are going to the schools, actually their own children, or they're in the same community, and before they didn't recognize the value of drinking milk would add to their diet. And through that sensitization, but also the policy and also the political will from the government, has been able to make this better for the companies. And it also comes at a time when in Uganda we are facing a problem with the ban of milk, because of a number of issues happening between the cross-border trades happening between Uganda and Kenya. And you find that the processors actually are left with so much milk that is not sold to the export market. So building local markets through such initiatives can also add value to the whole ecosystem of trying to promote productive use of energy, so that we have the markets that then can support the trade. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come to you in just one second. And we are quickly running out of time, but I do need to get one question off to the money in the room. Look, I mean, everything takes money, right? It takes money to transform a market, and it takes money to build a market. And this whole panel is about how do we do that in a sustainable way with a very particular point of view. And, there's a lot of learnings we've had in the energy access sector, right? The 15 years ago, when so many of our companies were starting out just focus on those first connections, which is still a very crucial piece of the puzzle. And it feels like so much money is now interested in supporting concepts like the modern energy minimum and, the bigger connections and all of that. But oftentimes oftentimes, especially when we look at the amount of energy actually needed by an individual farmer, it's quite different. And in many cases, we're talking about products and technologies that will also provide the first connection for some of these people. So I just would love to hear from Yolanda, speaking both as herself and as in her role at the IKEA Foundation, about how do we deal with this. And let me just footnote that by saying, part of the reason I am so intense about figuring out a better way to talk about this category of productive use of energy is because we need to be a better friend to ourselves and speak in a way that can get more climate money into this sector. And when we use nomenclature that nobody understands, how are we going to get it funded? So just a little bit of a rant, but I think it's well-intentioned, and I'd love for Yolanda to kind of bring us back to earth about, how do we deal with these sort of almost competing areas, right? Where you've got people wanting to just get tons of money to do giant connections for somebody's first connection, and then we've got an over-electrified situation. And maybe you want to talk about how do we get more climate funders interested in this category?
Well, thanks for this very simple question, Christina. And, I will try my best to answer it. But I'm with you when, I don't really mind what label we put on it, right? For us, it's important that we look at the end users and what we want to achieve. So if we look at people, for example, farmers in this case, we want to make them resilient, improve their livelihoods. That's an end goal. How we get there doesn't really matter. Amy Lovins always said it nicely, like people want a hot shower and a cold beer. Doesn't really matter how that's being delivered, right? We can actually project the same kind of thinking on this as well. We, of course, at IKEA Foundation, we provide catalytic grant funding. There's only so much of that, so we need to spend it very carefully and make sure that we actually get those others on the room. So, in a way, I always feel proud that I see okay, we've been contributing to this energy of productive use of how we want to call this quite a bit, but on the other hand, I would love to see that there's also much more money in this room, right? So how do we get there? It's not an easy thing, but there's more and more attention for that nexus as well of these topics. So energy climate, even this forum, they changed the name. If we look at a report that came out yesterday, actually, for the Global Alliance of the Future of Food, they speak about that industrial food systems actually use 15% of the fossil fuels. So there's a strong link of actually, decarbonize those systems as well. And even if we look at COP, for example, food reform is on the table currently. So there is more interest in it. And if energy can be that enabler in order to get there, I think we should talk about it smartly, not worry about the labels that we put it on, but really think about who are we doing it for and collectively work towards that. Because I do get your point about, competing minds, and I do get the reality that organizations need to be able to run their offices in order to do their work, right? But it would sometimes be really refreshing if we can just get all together in a room, try to tackle a topic, and each and every one of us fulfill the rules or the roles that we're good at.
Yeah, thanks for that. We're quickly running out of time. Let's see what we can get in here, please. If you would identify yourself, your organization, and your question, and who should answer it.
Thank you. My name is Boo. I'm the CEO and co-founder of IBRIS, a solar irrigation company based in Senegal. I wanted to share two experiences. The first one is on the local manufacturing and the localization topic. Localization without good policy is a big issue. One of the experience I had in 2010. We've set up a manufacturing company to make solar panels in Senegal. And 3 years later, we shut down with an investment of 6 million euro. The reason was mostly the Chinese dumped the price at the time. And when you go to the US, they put an anti-dumping tariff for up to 300% sometime for panels imported from China. And this was not the case in Senegal. We was forced to shut down the company. So localization is good, local manufacturing, but without good policy, it's a big issue.
We do need to get to the question. I'm so sorry. We have 5 minutes left, and I got another question over here.
Okay. Yeah. The question will come to the scaling. What we're doing actually on the solar irrigation side. We've launched 2 years ago IBRIS, and doing solar irrigation. We've been able to deliver around 1,000 units to smallholder farmers. And actually, it's a matter of scale. But we're using consumer financing as a model. So the question is today for those panelists, what are the solutions out there to help those local companies scale and make bigger impact? Yeah.
Okay, so the question was generally about how do you help local companies scale. Let me see what Henok's question is, if you wouldn't mind, and let's see if we can get these two somehow integrated together. You're going to have to be brief, my friend.
Definitely. She heard me talking the other day.
I've known you for a few years.
True again. No, I'll be very direct. I come from the Horn of Africa. 1 in 7 people living under $2.15 live in that region. A key enabler for them is distributed energy. And we're all talking about projects. And these projects and these pilots that we all run, how do they actually end up being solutions for the farmers, for the small businesses, in a sense of urgency? Because I feel like this whole conference, I'm not sensing urgency. All the money in this room, by the way, I made this point already, there's too much money that's spelled out in the headlines we don't see on the ground. But even if that money comes, even if the money in the room throws every dollar in the region, it's not going to be enough. We need to unlock the local financing. One of our pilots, I can get into the point, in irrigation, cost 160,000 Ethiopian birr to implement. Less than a year into it, the farmer is able to increase his revenue from 190,000 to 690. This is 3x, more than 3x. That's fundable. That returns to the farmer. And that is the basis for a lender to lend as well. Why aren't we talking about scaling it up? We are not going to solve the problem. The countries, the ecosystem, the local actors are going to solve it. So my question is, how do we get there? Sorry, I still took longer than I wanted.
That's okay. All right, we're going to have to land this plane pretty quickly. So let's see how we can put these two questions together, and maybe we'll just go down the line for the panel. Everybody can take a quick shot, and I mean quick. So long story short, there was a question about how do we get essentially out of pilot-itis, right? And how do we create some urgency here? And so that's a bit of a communications and sort of strategy approach. And then a question about, how do we help farmers scale? Once they adopt these technologies, how do we, again, sort of connecting to the urgency here, get a rapid return and rapid change in this energy transition for agriculture we're speaking of. So, Eveline, just because I can see you in the mirror, I didn't know if you could tell that's how I'm looking at you. But why don't you take a quick shot at that, and then we're just going to go down the line, but it has to be quick.
I mean, I think I can be quite quick because I'm a little bit on the side of the people asking the questions. So yes, I'm looking forward to the answers. But I think a lot of it has to also do with policy. We need and with banks getting on board and understanding and seeing the data and the evidence that they can put down money also. So local financing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. They have nothing better.
Thank you, Ute.
Political leadership, we all struggle at the moment to see why we're not acting on climate. I mean, how much more obvious can it be? And the same in this area. I think it needs to come from within the countries affected, though, in terms of coming together in coalitions. I mean, it shouldn't be us here from IVENA or whoever. I mean, it needs to come from Africa, for example, people coming together. And I hope we'll hear something at COP on this issue.
Yeah. Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah, maybe replying to the gentleman from Senegal. Within Gogla, we have certain services and initiatives that could benefit a company like yours, including we are starting to launch now pay-as-you-go perform metrics for productive uses of energy. So if you're working with pay-as-you-go, you may be interested in that one. We want to sort of understand the perform metrics that financiers later on need to look at, to provide finance for companies like yourself. The other is the Elevate program. We have a program that works with locally owned small companies on the ground in Africa, providing a bit of a, like technical assistance and accompaniment. So that's, two options that you have. And quickly. Yeah, done. Okay, done.
Yolanda?
Oh, that was very quick, actually. No,
I've also known Carlos for a long time.
Yeah. I started to get to know Carlos also. So it's no, I mean, in general, at IKEA Foundation, we keep on sounding like this broken record. We keep on pushing for the end user needs as a starting point and putting it central to all the work that we do. But at the same time, also moving away from only technology as a solution, right? It needs to have like an ecosystem to thrive, which is a local one built on local knowledge. And local entrepreneurship. I mean, the first thing that I usually see when I visit the field, there's so much entrepreneurial spirits going on there. We should really build on that. I mean, people know exactly what they want. They just need a little help in order to get there sometimes. So perhaps from a funder's point of view, it might be really good if we challenge ourselves as well to look at, this kind of projectitis, as you call it.
Pilotitis.
Pilotitis, yes, it's probably a similar kind of approach. But I mean, look at more longer-term perspectives and also, look at the longer-term impacts that you want to achieve and then work backwards to how you can actually measure coming towards that rather than having that as your final outputs.
Thank you. Ibrahim?
Yeah, I'll speak to the point by Hanok. Mainly, we need to build the capacity of the financiers because one thing is to develop the good business models. But if the people who are funding this money are not aware of the opportunities, but also the kind of scale we can reach, then it becomes a bit of a difficult area to go to. But also, if you look at Africa, maybe as an example, there's a lot of growth in the digital economy. So with the mobile phone penetration, for example, in Uganda, it stands at about 65%. And when you look at the number of transactions which are actually happening in mobile phones, it's really huge potential to look at how do you untap the local funding, because most of the financial institutions are not able to reach the underserved communities, but with mobile phone penetration, we're able to look at opportunities to unlock this financing. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we are a few minutes over time. I was supposed to wrap things up with a big finish, but we don't have time for the big finish. So, but I do want to say that the sort of threads that at least I heard from this conversation had a lot to do with localization, had a lot to do with incentives that can really help support building a market, and the need to be very customer-centric. Which all of these things, the customer-centric approach is something that the decentralized renewable energy community has always been well known for and gotten right. And a lot of times that's a level of customer engagement and one-to-one understanding that doesn't exist from traditional forms of installed generation. But it has to start somewhere. And the fact that we are all here today, unified on this topic and learning things today, taking away some messages about what's critical is I think, a step in the right direction. Power for All recently released a call for an energy transition for agriculture, meaning the entire system, trying to get the entire chain moved off of the 80% of its fuel that comes from fossil fuels and trying to get more into the actual way to create a sustainable system that is regenerative, which is really powered by the sun, the water, the actual inputs we need from this glorious place we live called Earth. So thank you so much for being part of our discussion. Thanks to our panelists, and go forth. Cheers.